those are issues for both pedestrians, bike riders, that I think if you sort of look at this map, that those intersections that really need to be addressed. And while there are other routes, I just think that this diagram really highlights those conflicts and might be something to sort of keep in the back of our minds as priority intersections to hopefully and potentially deal with.
Yeah, so you pointed out at a key intersection, Watkins, Isabella, Alejandra, they're all sort of offset intersections, they don't quite align, but that's sort of the fulcrum point of the Beta Ridge and our other concept, the Grand Boulevard Greenway, the El Camino. So we do detail that out in terms of looking at Watkins in particular as being a key location to try and create a new walkway. Utilize Watkins as sort of a new place to cross, likely with some sort of beacon or flashing system. And then we introduce a two-way trail on the other side to then, if you want to go to Isabella, if you want to go to Alejandra, it's sort of a distribution point. But clearly Watkins is the way to get to Middlefield or to the park or to the Civic Center even. And so we did place a lot of emphasis on that location.
I just have one other question. Is it also going to address El Camino as having a dedicated bike lane, or is that part of the El Camino Grand Boulevard and not part of the Atherton scope?
We identified, essentially opportunities for both bike lanes and possibly even a two-way trail on the Atherton side, so the west side. The trail can be implemented in phases. I kind of showed that in the animation that I skipped over. It would require, at least in many parts, reduction of a travel lane. So our immediate recommendation is it might be worth really focusing on investing in a study with Caltrans to see what the options are. Samtrans also has obviously a clear stake, and they're looking at improving bus service. But you have a really unique condition here in Atherton for El Camino. Everywhere else, it's all about developers and investment and frontages. You've done the complete opposite, and I think that opens up almost a really new, exciting opportunity to really just get focus on mobility and getting a nice trail to get you where you want to go off the corridor. Actually having a trail on the corridor seems to make a lot of sense because of these funky connections across.
Thank you. Ed, you want to speak your question?
Yes, my name's Andrew Boone. I just wrote an article about this bike fed plan that was published just today. I was really late getting it done. I doubt any of you had a chance to read it. I work for Streets Blog San Francisco, and I had applied actually to serve on this advisory committee, but I think I wasn't chosen. My bad for not really following and getting involved in the community process. But I bike across Atherton all the time. I don't have a car, so I'm biking through here a lot to get to Redwood City, mostly to meetings or to go for some other reason farther to San Mateo. And I try every route. The Selby Elena is an excellent idea. I actually use this route. The only problem with it is you can't find out where you're going. There's no signs. So I'm just through sheer stubbornness finding ways to get through Atherton. And that's a simple thing. There should just be signs saying go this way. That lets people avoid El Camino and Middlefield. Now I use El Camino a lot because it's just going on Middlefield has its own hazards. You have narrow side of the road to use. And El Camino, since I'm a cyclist who has a lot of experience, I can handle it. But it's not reasonable the way it is. There's 5 feet of space there on a shoulder that's constantly getting overgrown with things. And not just for people biking and walking, but my girlfriend, she drives on El Camino to get to work. She doesn't want to bike there ever. But she's scared about driving there because she knows that people got hit. And she sees that condition that happens where the rightmost lanes yield and then maybe the leftmost lane doesn't, and she doesn't want to hit somebody. It's scary for her to drive there, so I think this reduction of lanes is really important. It should be studied, and I'm very glad that it's being recommended by Alta. The other way to go north-south, you're right, Bill, that it's down Middlefield, and then what cyclists want to do is get off of Middlefield as soon as they can. So a signed route, informing that also would be useful. Glenwood makes sense, yes, because it crosses the town and goes up. It is a street you can use to get up all the way across the town. But it's another one of those, like, I figured it out, but just because I'm using a bike, it should be directed to go that way. The other way, this east-west way, crossing El Camino here at Watkins and Isabella, that is not going to work, and it's not a good idea unless there's a traffic signal there. what the route that I use because of that is to go on Fair Oaks and go down and just go straight across. There's a traffic signal, so you can't cross 6 lanes on a bike or walking without a traffic signal. It just doesn't. It's not safe even with a flashing light. So I agree that Watkins would be great. It's a great street to make work, but this isn't a place people can cross. So I think that Watkins should be improved, and this intersection needs to be improved, but not as not as a signed route. If you need to make a left-right dogleg like this, you definitely don't want to do it on El Camino. To go on Fair Oaks, you got to do it there. You got to do it up on Middlefield. You still have to do this uncomfortable, turn right and then turn left across traffic, but it's a lot more reasonable for more people to do. I think signing a route up through this this residential streets that are curving around is not a bad idea. I go this way because I don't want to go on Valparaiso or on even on Selby sometimes. If I just want really to be on what's basically equivalent to a bike path, you take a little residential street, and people would do this. They would ride their bikes, except you just get lost and you get stuck in Atherton, and you got to look up your map if you have one. And because you can't find your way across
Worst place to be stuck, right?
So have you gone to Lindenwood? You should go to
Yeah.
bike to Lindenwood.
There's
no way out.
There's
We're
no
there for a
exit.
couple of
There's-
days. So just get in, you never get out. Hopefully something will feed you.
That's what I think about the routes and just about the plan itself. I think this big idea of changing El Camino is really very important and a bold thing that really you gotta go for it. You gotta study this carefully, and Caltrans is not gonna probably like this idea at all, and so they have to be proven that this is something better. Bill explained to me, I called him yesterday, he said, hey, we're not gonna have a traffic bottleneck on El Camino. This isn't the bottleneck, it's Menlo Park and Redwood City. Well, a study can prove that to Caltrans, and we can take the next step. And seriously, I'm out of my own personal safety just worried about it. I know people are getting killed or almost killed trying to get across the street, El Camino.
Yes, so the only thing since we're short on time, I did want to go over, I guess on page 35, you have your
Can I just interrupt you? Because I just want to make a comment on him before going to a new subject. Okay, I'm sorry,
It's okay.
but I just want to give you a little bit of heart about Caltrans, because a year and a half ago, we met with Caltrans representatives, and they were very receptive for Atherton to take control of their segment of El Camino Real and reduce the lanes.
Oh, wow.
And so but it is a process.
It's a long.
But we're
in it.
But we're in it, and we started it a year ago, January, and we met with them, with our public works director, and we're gonna, continue to Chinese water torture them, but they were not opposed to it.
Oh, okay, thank you.
There's definitely some change happening, and just, I think, to speed up the conversation, I want to point out, we think that focusing sort of at the edge with North Fair Oaks is going to be probably the most competitive in terms of seeking grant funding, because of a big emphasis placed on disadvantaged communities. This also is a school route, also has transit. So you begin to tick off all these boxes. Watkins is really important, but it's really important, really more for Atherton and some more localized connections. There have been fatalities, which people tend to perk up when they see that. But in terms of trying to be that strategic project, what's going to be that application, we think this is the project. And just to point out, I was out there the other day taking some pictures, and here's an example. A lot of folks are using that and not too comfortable, I don't think, to do that dog leg.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so on page 35, you have your 4 areas, and I just want to point out to the rest of the council, when we went over these things, I think that both Valerie and I were very strong on that, and we've got to look at the safety and the safe routes to schools should be the highest priority. We got to look at where we're having the accidents, to help prioritize these things. Yes, indeed, putting some signs that would be on the, these sharrows with the arrows going on the bottom of the street. That seems to be non-obtrusive and it's something that we could probably do fairly cheaply. But the major expense, I would think, it's gotta be about safety. El Camino is number one. Of course, we're already trying to do something, but I think that the safe routes to schools, I think that we felt that it should be a little bit higher. But we've got to keep in mind where we've had those accidents, which was on your figure number 2. Okay, so my comment, and that was essentially when we went over it with you.
Right, and so since that time, we had our 13 million worth of projects that we talked about at the SAG meeting, and since that time, we've included in this most recent version of the plan a more specific way of prioritizing projects, and we've essentially cut that number in half. So, trying to weed out what would be good ideas but just aren't available. And so what we've, to finish up really, I think what we did is take our cost estimates, which we've done for all of the projects, again, to get to that 13 million. We've prioritized that based on explicit criteria that really do come from the goals and objectives. And then I think this is the key graphic here, which actually I'm introducing tonight. It's in the plan, just in sort of a narrative in the numbers at the end. But how do you even tackle that 7 million number, right? That was a key theme that we got out of the stakeholder advisory group. So what we did is we essentially said, okay, those like El Camino, for example, you're going to seek outside grant funding. Anything that's really complex, you're not going to tackle that yourself. You can't because it's not your facility. So that's really this blue pie, and as well as Watkins and Marsh Road being other key, just difficult projects. Those are going to be grant opportunities, or not likely to happen anytime soon. We also expect, because of Caltrans being a partner on El Camino and some of the adjacencies for the corridors with the county and Menlo Park, that we could expect that you could partner up with some of these jurisdictions to either apply for other grants or just team up together like you did for Valparaiso Middlefield. So what that leaves you is this local match, and we assume some local match with the grants as well. And so out of that 7 million number, we're now trying to whittle down to what's manageable here. We think $1.5 million is probably a goal you should strive for. And I think the question is this a 20-year goal? Is it a 10-year goal? I think that would help us in terms of what you might want to contribute to in the CIP. That would help us, I think, tidy up the end of this plan. We think this is probably a decent number to strive for, but again, it might take 20 years, and that's the kind of question where we're grappling with right now. There's also things that we can do, sort of short-term strategies, just working with the 5-year paving plan, and you're already out there slurry sealing, you're already going to be putting back what's there. Can we make minor tweaks? And it's really a really low-cost way of beginning to implement the plan and just really at the basics and see what happens. So I think we're already going to be talking about that for Middlefield, since that's coming up for a slurry seal, going back to the Marsh intersection, trying to actually introduce some of that concept with this upcoming project, at least to get it started. And then we identify that there's hurdles with actually widening out the lanes to meet the standard, because you have drainage and holes and all the other issues. But there are some striking things that are pretty simple, pretty straightforward that we can do to at least get them on the ground. People can see what they look like, and we're on our way at least tackling some of the key hot spots.
And the other positive point, if I may, is, Council, you have appropriated 2 projects, one for miscellaneous traffic improvements, marking, sign, striping, and the other for bikeway improvements, and we'll be working with the Finance Department to develop those in your capital budget going forward. So there is some good news and some funding as well.
Can we shrink the lanes on Middlefield to 10 feet as opposed to 12 feet when we do the restriping? Is that something that we can do?
11 probably, because there's some buses.
Buses and trucks, indeed.
Are we out of contract now with, is this your final?
No,
Where
well,
are we?
we're near the end. They finished their draft. This is their draft. They'll finish up their master plan fairly soon. Council's authorized another task order for the grant assistance, and then I'll be talking to George. There may be some minor tweaks like on Middlefield that we'll want to involve them, and we may look at what we want to do in terms of involving them going forward.
Okay, but we
But this work is
approved the
almost
grant
done.
writing process, right?
Yes, you did.
Okay, all right.
Rick?
First, I think you did a terrific job. This thing is a model for what we want master plan is really good.
Great.
I think that in your goals and objectives that you had on page 2, I guess it is? I
Yes.
don't know if it's 11 or 2. You had 7. The third and fourth were remove barriers for accessing key destinations and improve connectivity to adjacent communities. Those seem like much lower priorities to me than what are numbers 5, 6, and 7. So,
What page are you on?
Pull it up here.
Oh, okay.
yeah. So I think the top 2 are the right ones, and I think 5, 6, and 7 are more important than 3 and 4. I didn't fully understand 3 and 4.
I think a lot of that is comments, well, one about, to be competitive for funding, I think you have to seek
Well,
those partnerships.
For sure. And I
and
agree,
then-
and I like your idea about North Barrows. I think that sounds great.
Right, and then I think, we were some of this was handed to us sort of in the RFP, so we're just reflecting that back to you. But again, you do have a lot of key commuter routes, so folks are coming through Atherton, and so sort of being part of the regional network, striving to have, improve the connectivity so that folks don't, come in and out of Atherton.
That's 4. I understand that. I didn't understand what the barriers were. What barriers are there to?
I would say El Camino's a barrier, right, so I think.
That's for sure, but we're totally into that. I mean,
Yeah.
That's our top priority for this whole area.
Yeah, so this is just, I think we didn't spend a whole lot of time on trying to.
We're just fun.
Okay.
I really thought it was good. I think there's a lot to digest, and we could spend the whole 2 hours
Yeah.
just on this.
Yeah, we
And I
should.
think we should spend more time on this, because this is really good. In terms of time frame for the dollar amounts you showed, I mean, we'll see what happens coming into the next 2 years, but I'm thinking this
Yeah.
is not a 10-year project, it's a 3-year project. This is important.
Yeah.
That'll be challenging, just to count El Camino alone, but.
Well, we're not gonna
we
get
get
it
a
done in
big
that
grant.
timeframe,
But I think saying, what can we do in 3 years, and then, maybe that's a different framework for, putting the next, the immediate steps in place, rather than trying to work from that big number, what seems achievable in 3 years and get.
Oh, that was excellent.
Gordon and George, anything else about? We're good? Motion to adjourn?
Yes.
Aye. Elizabeth, that was an aye.
That was an aye.
Perfect.
Yes. No,